Hello and welcome to this next tutorial in Photoshop. We're going to be doing something super fun and creative. I saw this tutorial online, thought it was awesome. It's a really simple way to use clipping mask and also just some simple gradient overlays to create a kind of a cool background photo. Normally you would set this document as a larger background image, say for a computer desktop background or a website background, but for our purposes today we're going to set it up to be an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and that will allow us to post it into our portfolios really well, and it won't distort too bad when we're trying to get it into that small tight size. So for today, first things first, this is what we're going to be creating, or something similar. I might use a different picture in the background, but generally this is the idea that we're going for. You can create this with any shape. You could create it with squares or polygons or all kinds of crazy stuff, but for today we'll do triangles to give ourselves just a nice little crisp modern looking background feature. So first things first, go File, New from our panel at the top in Photoshop. There's all kinds of different custom stuff that we've used in the past here. Generally, just make sure that it is 8.5 inches wide by 11 high, and our resolution is going to be 300 pixels per inch, and we're using RGB color mode, and our background by default is going to be white to get started. So throw your name in here. This is Photoshop Project 2, just so that you know where it's saving and what's going on. Once you've got all this stuff ready to go, you hit create, and we should end up with a nice white document to get started. There's lots of different ways to create a gradient overlay onto this background area. You could use the gradient tool and draw it out and then kind of adjust it accordingly after the fact. One neat way though is to actually take this layer and add it as an effect. In order to do that though, we have to unlock this layer. So we simply have to just click on the lock icon and it will unlock that layer for us. This allows us to add effects now. If you noticed before, when this layer was locked, we cannot add any effects. We can't do any masks to it. But when we click here to unlock it, you now can mask and do effects to that layer. So we're going to add a new layer style, or I call it effect. And we are going to use the gradient overlay effect. So this should pop up for you here, a lovely little browser viewer that has the different settings. We're going to go with just normal for our blend mode. We are going to go with an opacity of 70%. So you can type in the box here 70%. We want to have a linear style for our overlay. You can check this box that says align with layer, and right now it's 90 degrees. If we wanted it to be set on a fade to the sides, to the edges of our image, you would have to change this degrees. But for today, this seems to work pretty good. And then we are going to scale this all the way up to 150% right to the very top. The last thing you need to do is click on the gradient here. By default, the gradient will look like this. So if you click the default black and white gradient preset, you should have black on one side, white on the other. We want to get this to be 50% here. So this white selector tab, click on the square, click location. This should be 50%. And then what we need to do is duplicate this one on the black side. So if you hold the Alt key on your keyboard and you click and drag, it'll actually make a copy of the black one. Oops, I only want one copy of the black one. And you're going to drag this one all the way across to the far side. So now you get black, white, black as your gradient. And then the last step, we don't want to go all the way to white. We just want to go to gray. So if you double click on this color stopper, it will bring up your color picker, and then you can pick a light gray color, or if you want to be exactly the same as me, if you just type into the numbers here, B7, 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 it gives you this nice kind of light gray color to get started with. Okay, so super simple, hopefully. Select OK. That's going to save that color spectrum here for your gradient. Select OK here. That's going to update into there. And when you select OK for the last time, you should have this nice whitish gray, soft gray background that just transitions, and you get the gradient overlay on your background there. In order to create the shapes, Photoshop has a built-in shape tool. It has multiple ones. It has rectangles, rounded tools, ellipses, polygons. Okay, we're going to use the Polygon tool, and up in the top right-hand side here, because we're doing triangles, triangles have 3 sides. If we wanted to do like 6-sided hexagons or whatever, you could change it to 6 sides, and you'd just as easily be able to use these to draw out your shapes. But in our case for today, let's use triangles. So set those sides to 3, and now we can draw out our first triangle. That is the one that's probably the biggest of them all. When you're first setting up your triangle and drawing it out, it's not a bad idea to hold the shift key. That will prevent it from going weird shapes and angles in between. Okay? You'll be able to then take this and flatten it out. So Control T, we want to make sure that this is straight as best as possible, right? Looks fairly straight. If you're not sure if it's straight, you can bring down a ruler to see if it's straight. If you don't have your rulers panel, Control R on the keyboard brings up or hides these rulers. And when you click and drag down, I know we've done this before, but you can drag down a bar that's going to show you exactly what's considered flat. From here, it's super simple. You're just adjusting the size of these triangles and moving them around. So if you remember, the fast, easy way to copy something is to hold Alt on your keyboard. It brings up this second arrow icon, and you can drag down, and then I can go Control T and rotate this to a matching angle, and I can also hold Shift and scale it down. Or, because it doesn't really matter if it's in proportion, right? You got to make sure that you keep it in proportion. You don't want to mess up your shapes, because this is not going to work if all of a sudden the angles all change. So be sure to hold Shift while you scale the shape. It will allow you to line it up a lot easier. Then it's simply just a matter of be creative. Hold Alt, drag out more copies that are the same. You can also hold Alt, drag them down, and again, Control T brings up the scales. Shift allows you to scale it down. You can rotate it. If you use the arrow keys on the keyboard, you can use them to nudge your triangles into place where you would like them to be. So, pretty straightforward for the most part. Basically, you're just having some fun creating different shapes and ways to adjust these objects. Once you're reasonably happy with what you've come up with, you want to group them together. There's a few different ways to group them together. The easiest is just simply to click on the top shape, whichever is the last one you created. Hold the Shift key, scroll down, click on the first one you created, and then when you right click, you can either merge the shapes into one, or you can do what's considered convert to smart object. I like smart object because I could double click on this and make adjustments. If I merge them all to one shape, then I can't really break them apart again later after the fact, so it's nice to do it as a smart object. You can always go back and change it. That's why we did this the way we do it. Okay, I'll go back one step. So, we have all these polygons that we've made, these triangles. We want to get them into one blob so we can move them around. Okay? Take the top one, whichever the last one you made was. Hold the Shift key. Click on the first one that you made. And then you are going to right click and say convert to smart object. Okay? By converting to smart object, it's like non-destructive. It doesn't just mush them into one blob and you can never get them apart again. I could double click on this cool box with the little inset box here, which shows me that it's a smart object. If I double click on this, it will actually open back up the original, what is this, 6 different polygons. And so if I wanted, I could go, wait a minute, I actually would prefer to have this polygon be up this way. Now, I liked it where it was, so I'm going to put it back. But it would be awesome. You could adjust them, or you could add more in at this point. And then all you have to do is close this, and it will give you a little warning saying, do you want to save it? And you just say yes. Use the little X on the deal here, but not on your main document. Make sure you X only on the extra document. Okay? So now what this does, though, because it's a smart object, I can now move the whole thing around accordingly. Okay? I could also scale the whole thing accordingly. So if I went Control T now, I can bring up and I can see that I have the same transformation tools as I would normally. If I move this around till the pink line shows up both vertically and horizontally, I now know that it's in the center of the page, which is kind of where we want it to be, is right in the center of the page. Once you like where it's positioned, hit the Enter key on your keyboard and save that transformation. The last step is now to, well, second last we'll call it. The second last step is to actually get some image into this box. Because these are black boxes, this is why it works. If these were not black, it wouldn't necessarily work as well. So just FYI, we've done this with black. It's for a reason, and it works the best this way. What we're going to do is go File, Place a new link document in. So if you still happen to have those folders from before, from those other pictures that I gave you, you could pick one of these pictures down here. You could use the girl again. You could use the finished Photoshop document, whatever you want to try. There's lots of different ways for this to work. I'm going to use this kind of Northern Lights green kind of wispy one. Because it's not big enough to cover the whole set of images, I'm going to put it down here like this, and I'm going to hold Shift and I'm going to scale this up really big so that it actually covers up the entire set of shapes. When I push enter on the keyboard, on the number pad, or on the regular keyboard, it will save that image and update the quality so that it's as good as it can be at this resolution. Okay, so it looks a little weird. The shapes are in behind. The magic happens now when we right click on this layer and we say to create clipping mask. And when we create the clipping mask, magically it shows up now inside those shapes. And it's still there. That image is still able to be moved around and edited. Maybe you want a different portion of it, a little wispier. Maybe you want to move it down. You could control transform, make it bigger if you still needed to make it bigger. I don't really like the black kind of shape from the hills there. But now I've got this cool kind of wispy background thing going on. You could just as easily, I could, like I say, use it with the picture that we did yesterday. And you could drop that in there and it would give you a totally different look for the exact same background, same shapes, but a completely different look to the image. Okay? The last step here is to create a little bit of a drop shadow just so these shapes kind of look like they pop out of the page a little bit. And again, you're going to use this layer style option down at the bottom here. You could just double click on the layer and it would bring up those same options. But I like to hit the right one down here so that I can do the proper one to start with. We're going to do a drop shadow here. When we select the drop shadow, you're going to want to make sure that the opacity is around about 30%, give or take. Your angle kind of can be coming from wherever, but straight up and down is probably fine, so a 90-degree angle. Your distance, if you move this little panel to the side a little bit so you can see some of the shapes, you can see how the shadow changes. So depending on how far out you make it, depends on how much it looks like it's hovering. So I'm going to go around the 30 pixel range. You can adjust the spread. I'm going to leave the spread fairly low at 0. And then the size, if we have it to 0, it's really sharp shadows. If we bump it up to around 45, 50, somewhere in there, you get kind of a nice shadow. Whoops. It just makes it pop just that little bit so those images look like they're slightly 3D and a little more normal. Okay? And if you look, because I did two of these clipping masks, you can actually see one over top of the other. The one that's in behind obviously is at the mercy of whatever is on top. So if I wanted to take this away and just compare, these are my two different versions. Really, really simple to have that. And then from there, all you gotta do is save it, right? So we're gonna go File, Save As. Make sure this is my Photoshop Project 1 folder, but make sure you've labeled it accordingly so it's Photoshop Project 2. You can leave it as a Photoshop document because when you place it into your InDesign document, it will be allowed to go in as a Photoshop document. If you wanted to say email this to a friend and be like, check out this sweet background that I made in 20 minutes in class, you would need to save this as a JPEG and send it that way. Don't send your friends a PSD. It's not going to work. It just doesn't look quite right. So very cool thing. You can use any shape you want. The technique works super well all across the board. So hopefully you learned something. That one was super simple. It is 2:30. Wow, that was actually fast considering we took a big break. So I'm going to edit this down into a much shorter video and I will post it in case you want to refer to it later. Hope you all have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye.